Elementary teachers of Reddit, what have you assigned for your own amusement? We have a centers activity every week called Would You Rather, and they have to give me reasons why they picked one option over the other. I remember I asked once, would you rather be invisible or be able to fly? One little girl said I would be invisible so that I can go spy on daddy and see why he likes a nanny so much. One time I saw them kiss and he saw me. I want to know why they kissed. When I was in kindergarten they had us write down how old we thought our mother was and how much she weighed. Then our teacher wrote it down for us, we colored it, and gave it to our moms for Valentine's Day. I guessed my mom was 90 years old and weighed 300 pounds, so I'm sure that was really entertaining for my teacher and a great present for my mom. My dad taught high school for a while and his students used to do an activity in which they would try to hear their own echo in plastic, styrofoam, and paper cups of varying sizes. He would just explain it and give them a handout, then sit back and watch for the hour. It would never work, though some of the students were convinced that they did hear their echo, but my dad sure did enjoy watching a room full of high schoolers yelling into a cup and then quickly put it to their ears. He would get a pretty steady flow of coworkers coming in and out to watch as well. It became a running joke among the faculty. I remember my English teacher in middle school once told us to write a paper on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for homework. Weeks after we turned it in, he comes to school with a pack of bread and a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jelly. He called people up and read their paper out loud. People wrote that to make a PB&J sandwich, they get bread and spread the jelly and peanut butter. But they didn't say to get slices of bread, open the jars of peanut butter, or spreece it with a knife. So every student goes up and has to roll the jars on the pack of jelly. When I was called up, my paper said to get to slices or bread, misspelled of, so he got a kick out of that. And there I am, rolling jars on slices of bread. It was pretty funny and taught us to be specific when describing things. Mr. Shin, you are a troll. I taught kindergarten, and, as most elementary teachers know, I needed ways to get all of my kids to drop what they were doing and listen to an instruction or announcement, etc. It's usually something that a teacher says, and the students respond in a specific way. There are a bunch of chants that different teachers use. For example, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. 1, 2, eyes on you. Or repeating a clapping pattern. Well, with a teacher born in the late 80s, my kindergarteners learned, alright, stop, and they would stop, drop everything and chant back, collaborate and listen. It took literally all of my willpower to not bust out into Ice Ice Baby every single day. TL. Doctor, I taught my kindergarteners to respond mechanically to the beginning of a 1990 white boy rap song. I teach English in a middle school. Every day I assign a short writing assignment and mostly the kids do the very least amount of work to complete the journal entry. Luckily for me, every once in a while someone will take the prompt and run with it. Here is a free verse poem I got once. Potatoes roll down the hill, rumble rumble, to Jack and Jill. The potatoes squash them, squish, and stole the crown, and sold it at a pawn shop, but only got $50. A high school teacher did this to mess with their students on 4/20 as they were all going to be celebrating it. In my first period 10 out of 30 students were high, second period maybe 7, and I don't think any of the students in my advanced class were high. I brought 2 big bags of chips, Cheetos and Fritos, and put them on my desk in the front of the room. I also brought a couple bags of mini candy bars. First period, when I arrived on campus at 7:30 AM there was a strong smell of the reefer. I put the bag of chips on my desk in the front of the room. I also made some copies of Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll and downloaded the opening scene of Super Troopers. The bell rings, my students shuffle in. I'm fairly certain that 10 of the students were feeling the reefer love. The second bell rings, and I don't start class right away as I usually do. I sit at my desk, sitting quietly, looking at no one in particular. One of my happy students raises his hand and asks who the chips and candy are for. I say, they are my snacks. If you're hungry, I might share them with you. It depends. The class laughs. He insists that he is not hungry, just curious. Then I start class. Standardized test prep, crazy fun. I'm not getting a lot of participation, so I offer up the candy as a reward for correct answers. My students, particularly my happy students, start participating. Candy is a good participation motivator. In the middle of the lesson, I pass out Jabberwocky and we read it. All of my students found it trippy because it is trippy, high or not. Then we watch the opening scene of Super Troopers. They found it hilarious. Some of my happy students weren't really laughing. I wasn't sure it made them nervous until I started the next activity. I had my students write poems about the scene from Super Troopers imitating the style of Jabberwocky. It ended up being a really fun, constructive activity. Exploring alternative forms of poetry is always fun. I had 5 of my happy students share. Most of the poems were just gibberish. Topics ranged from strawberry fields. I was kinda proud of this, to BMX biking the Milky Way, and one trying to convince his parents he wasn't hungry. Haha. This sharing time ended with more candy giving, and lots of laughs. We did some more test prep, and then the bell rings. 2 of my happy students give me high fives on the way out. They totally knew what I was doing. Second and third period, did the same thing. Had less high students and word had gotten around about my chips, candy and weird ass poem. More laughs and students acknowledging my scheming ways. Third period is my advanced class, so none of them were high, and by then all of them had heard what was going on. We ended up having a pretty good discussion about legalizing drugs. Ron Paul even came up, which ensued a debate about presidential candidates. They got to eat the chips and the rest of the candy. Overall, it was a fun and educational day. Wish I could have done more, but I love teaching, and I'm pretty awesome at it. Not a teacher, but I remember this from elementary school. The teacher assigned us something to teach us to ready all directions first, before we start something. But she didn't tell us that. The paper has like 30 steps and it's asking us to do small things. Write your name, draw a house, color the house red, draw a person, etc. But then at the last step it tells us we should have just written our name, and not do what the other steps said to do. Only 2 kids managed to read all the directions and just write their name. They got 3 fucking stickers in their chart. Not fair. I teach 4th grade and we learn about taxation without representation. I used to do an activity where every student brought in 100 pennies. Over the course of a few days, students would have to pay taxes on things like using the pencil sharpener, worksheets, using the door, etc. After a few days, I would have a good amount of money in the tax jar on my desk. Well, I would empty it and then bring in donuts for myself and the other grade 4 teachers. We would all stand in the hallway in the morning eating the donuts and telling the 4th graders how tasty they were and sarcastically thank them for the donuts that were paid for with their taxes. So, of course, the students would get really peeved. They would then write their Declaration of Independence from the 4th grade. We would then celebrate their new freedom with a pizza party at lunch, which is where the money would actually be used. I don't do this activity anymore because I had some parents that are too stupid to figure out they chipped in $1 toward a pizza party for the class that I then put in about $20 in to pay for. They went to the school board accusing me of stealing from students and demanded I be fired. So, don't do that one now, but I sure miss those donuts. I get them to dance. My K5 art classes can earn a bubble gum and dance party if they showed exceptional behavior that month. They police each other all month to win those 15 minutes of dancing. You all have not lived until you have seen 6-year-olds dancing to Gangnam Style, flailing their bodies around like beached squid, writhing on the floor break dancing. You have not lived. Not me. This was my 5th grade teacher. We were given 10 locations spread across the United States. Average cost of lodging for a night. Base cost for gas per mile. The task was to find the most efficient way for him to visit all 10 of his family members using the least amount of money. I thought the question was fun. Now looking back on it, realizing he was using us to do all the boring parts of a trip. This was before Google Maps and MapQuest was around. He gave us the option to pack up to 3 days worth of food and drive between 12 hours a day with 2 months to make the trip. I teach at elementary in Japan, and half my job is also teaching about the various cultures of the world. I have an English board where I put up various posters that I will have students make as projects. Last week, the posters that we made were about different games around the world. Mankiller, tic-tac-toe and the like. I couldn't help but throw Dungeons and Dragons into the ring as a potential game that a pair could make a poster about. One of the pairs picked it and ran with it and drew a really cool picture as well. My grade 6 teacher assigned a book report for the 18th emergency, a book about a kid who gets bullied. I really don't remember much about it. What he didn't tell us, however, was that he thought the entire contents of the book would reveal, hence not remembering much. He read aloud excerpts of people's book reports praising the book and counted the points brought up with direct examples in the book. It was the first book report we had in his class and he gave us specific directions that for our next book report, in order to get a passing mark we have to give our honest opinions on the book's contents. Might sound a little harsh for 6th grade, but I feel like it was a slap in the face that we needed for critical thinking, myself included. I teach 1st grade. No matter what I assign, I get the funniest answers. This one kiddo wrote a 10-page story about frogs. Although, every time he spelled frogs, he wrote fags. Fags can jump. Fags like flies. Yeah, you can imagine. I'm grading some papers now of sentences written with spelling words. Here are some fun ones. My bus driver won't let us move our seat. I keep my money in our ATM. Teacher, are you nice today? These balls are green, these pepper are crazy, and all the ways they spelled the word awesome equals the same. Awesome, 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 awesome. I could go on and on. A girl wouldn't stop talking about the brand of hair coloring she liked that was so much better than every other brand. For her punishment I made her give a presentation about the active ingredients of this hair coloring in several different brands. This was chemistry, so it worked. Turns out they all had the same active ingredient at the same concentration. Hopefully she learned both a lesson about paying attention and about saving money. In my 2-year tech school, one of our first assignments for a class of about a dozen was this. Every odd person writes on their stack of papers what they want the person to their right to draw. Every even person drew a little picture. You then pass your papers to the right. For the pictures, you had to guess what was drawn. If you got writing, you had to draw that. You then continued to pass to the right, and you couldn't look through the stack to see what other people drew or guessed. Once we all got our stack of papers back, we went through them individually in front of the class to see how it evolved from the initial drawing or description of the drawing all the way to the end. By far the most fun and hilarious schoolwork I have ever done. The point of all this was to show how directions got screwed up if everybody wasn't on the same level, or if you had vague directions or a vague drawing. I teach Taekwondo to elementary age children, and I love giving them really hard warm-ups in classes when they are being pains in the ass. Even better, every teacher's dream, when a child is rude, disrespectful, or just plain bad, I can give them physical punishments, and it's encouraged by parents. You want to backtalk me? That's 20 push-ups, and the correct answer is yes ma'am. In 5th grade, on April Fool's, our social studies tests were due to be handed back that day. My teacher told us that most of us did very well, although 2 students did receive an F. She reminded us, as usual, that the sharing of grades was prohibited. What we did not know was that she had photocopied all of our tests and failed every single one of them. No one would tell each other what he/she got because he/she was so ashamed. We found out a solid 10 to 20 minutes later. I live in the Pacific Northwest. Every year or so I do a life cycle unit on slugs. Yes, my students have to find a slug and set up an environment for it. They keep them at school on their desks, and they have to do research. Eventually someone will ask, how do you tell if it is a girl slug or boy slug? I tell them to do some research. That spawns all kinds of discussions. We top the week off with slug races and the winner gets a trophy. Of course they have to train the slugs to race. My training and experience was as a high school teacher. After college, I substitute taught for a while. My very first day of subbing was in a 1st and 2nd grade special ed classroom. I'm not sure what all the regular teacher did, but I managed to burn through her day's worth of lesson plans in the first 2 hours, so I had to start inventing stuff. She had a large supply of baby puzzles, most of which didn't even require putting puzzle pieces together, but just putting them in the holes that fit. Even these kids were too smart for this, so we had to make it more interesting. Each kid got a puzzle and mixed their pieces together on the table face down. With 8 or 9 kids sitting around the same table, it was quite a pile of puzzle pieces. When I told them to start, the first kid to assemble their puzzles won. The coolest part was, they didn't stop once they won. They helped the kid next to them, so they wouldn't be last. I burned another hour just with that game. A few weeks later I subbed in the same building, and the teacher I had subbed for told me that the kids loved the new game. She said she got really upset when she saw the kids mixing puzzle pieces, but when she watched what they were doing, she was thrilled. There was a teacher in my school who used to do an activity to sprout lima beans every year. She kept a bag of lima beans in her desk for a day when she really needed quiet, then she'd introduce the activity as, "Today we are going to sprout lima beans. It's going to be hard, but if we do it right, by the end of the day you're going to have a tiny plant to take home. Lima beans need a warm, dark, moist environment, so we are going to hold them in our mouths until they sprout." Then she'd remind them all day about how opening their mouths might let in too much light. The kids would sit and work quietly all day with the beans soaking in their spit, wrap them tightly in a wet paper towel for lunch and recess, and then pop them back in their mouths until the end of the day. At the end of the day when nobody had a sprouted plant, she'd act confused and read the bag and declare that maybe she bought the wrong sort of beans. I teach middle school science, and every year I do a lesson where my students make models of ionic and covalent bonds using gumdrops. I hype it up the whole week saying how they'll get to do a lab using candy, and how they get to eat it at the end. Even though they are 8th graders, they eat that shit up. Anyways, what I don't tell them is that, since I'm cheap and don't feel like buying gumdrops, I go to the local Giant and buy what is advertised as spiced drops. They all basically taste like either cinnamon or mint, but not in a good way at all. That feeling of after the first kid gets all the way through his lab, all excited because he finally gets to eat the candy, and takes the first bite, and then spits it out in disgust, that is what makes teaching worth it.